Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Again, as Jan mentioned, we are going to talk about sugar and other nutrition myths today. Um, and thank you all oh, yes, we do have a lot of people here. Thank you all so much for joining us. Our goal today is to gain perspective on carbohydrates and how it relates to cancer, to understand appropriate carbohydrate choices, gain perspective on some other common nutrition myths, and the influence of lifestyle on our overall health. So I find this very informative quote, and I wanted to start this way because I think it's helpful to gain some perspective on what can cause cancer to develop. So this quote is carcinogenesis, which is the development of cancer, is a complex process involving multiple sequential mutations, which occur randomly in the DNA of normal cells over many years. It can even be decades until finally specific genes are mutated or changed and cell growth becomes out of control, resulting in the full, you know, tumor and potential metastasis. And I think it's important to look at the words here of multiple mutations, which can be random, which can be over a long period of time. And there is something to be said here about affecting specific genes. So let's keep that in mind. So, what causes cancer? If you think of it this way, sugar isn't what's going to cause cancer. It's very diet specifically is way too simplified for that, or allows it to continue to grow. And certainly, we can't cure cancer by not eating sugar. There are multiple factors that are involved in the cause of cancer. Many of the foods that we know that fight cancer have naturally occurring carbohydrates or naturally occurring sugars. So again, it's not as simple as saying sugar causes cancer or sugar can make cancer grow. As I mentioned, we want to gain some perspective on the different types of sugars. So what are we going to find in our food supply is simple sugars and complex. And a lot of people I know have heard these terms before: simple sugars, complex carbohydrates. I think specifically simple sugars that are processed is what I want to start by talking about. And these types of sugars can raise your blood sugar quickly because they require very little digestion. Highly processed, which also means they're nutritionally depleted, meaning the way it's grown in earth, or say, for instance, the sugar cane versus table sugar, even that sugar cane has become nutritionally depleted. We've removed parts of that product, processed it, cleaned it, bleached it, all these different kind of things that happen. Because they are lacking any nutritionally significant vitamins, minerals, or immune enhancing components, they act as inflammatory agents to the body. So these types of sugars, these processed simple sugars, can cause inflammation. It is something that we want to limit or avoid as much as possible. We don't have to avoid them completely, but simple switches from processed sugars to more natural, more complex carbohydrates can be made and would be better choices. So simple processed sugars, we're going to look on the label for words like brown sugar, cane sugar, beet sugar, invert sugar. Anything with cane in the name, crystals, evaporated cane juice, anything with ends in ose, so dextrose, glucose, sucrose, and syrups. So high fructose corn syrup, malt sugar, brown rice syrup, are all these types of processed simple sugars. I think high fructose corn syrup is the most popular and the most common, along with corn syrup, that we find in ingredient lists of food products in our supply right now. So simple sugars of value. So the processed sugars, as we mentioned, because they are nutritionally depleted, because they're easy to digest, they're going to raise blood sugars significantly. They're going to not supply the body with any antioxidants or vitamins or minerals or things like that. So they're really just kind of working against our own health. There are simple sugars of value. Fruit is a wonderful mixture, for instance, of complex sugar, complex carbohydrate, fiber, and simple sugars. Now, fruit is going to be loaded with vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants that we know help to fight cancer. Let's just take a very simple example of an apple. An apple is a combination of the apple peel, which is a complex carbohydrate, which is fiber. There's a lot of vitamins and antioxidants in that peel of that apple, like, for instance, quercetin, which has been studied to fight cancer. You have your internal flesh, which is a combination of yet a different type of fiber, soluble fibers and pectins, along with the juice, which is going to be more simple sugars. The apple itself, we know in combination is going to fuel our good gut bacteria. We know it's going to fill us up. It's going to provide satiety, and it's going to help fight cancer from many different studies. Honey is another simple sugar of value. It does provide immune boosting properties from the bees themselves. There's a little bit of iron in honey, along with cancer fighting potential and properties that have been compared to tamoxifen. Maple syrup is another example of as a good source of zinc, as a natural sugar, as a different type of carbohydrate, which these would be when we need a sweetener for, say, recipes, or our morning oatmeal or a smoothie would be kind of the go-to to start with as far as simple sugars of value. So why are we worried about processed sugars? So high fructose corn syrup, white sugar are essentially the same. They're basically 50-50 fructose and glucose molecules. They're both problematic in terms of a metabolic response. So for the general population, especially in recent decades where high fructose corn syrup and extra sugar has been added to almost everything, this high intake of fructose produces a hormone called ghrelin. And ghrelin is an I'm hungry hormone. So it continues to stimulate our body to want more food. It does not stimulate leptin, even though we've eaten and we should be telling our bodies that we're full. It does not allow for that. So sugar and high fructose corn syrup are metabolically different than complex carbohydrates. Glucose from digesting complex carbohydrates is metabolized by every cell of the body and produces that rise in leptin, which is an I'm full hormone, and suppresses that ghrelin. So the sugar and cancer connection is much more related to this overeating of processed sugar. In fact, probably has gotten higher than these numbers, but we eat now approximately 75 pounds per year or more of sugar compared to 30 years ago, which was more of 40 pounds per year, and I'm certain quite less at the turn of the century. So it has become a significant health issue, the amount of added sugars in our foods. It can be cereal, it can be cookies, it can be breads even, it can be cooked frozen meals, cooked products, salad dressings, and even sauces for food. So it really is a concern of, on that type of sugar. So like I said, we have two different types of sugars. Our complex carbohydrates, those complex meaning that, yes, it is going to be a source of glucose as it's digested, but it's a combination of fiber in the foods. So these are going to be foods that are high in fiber, and larger molecule sugars where it takes longer to break this down in digestion, and therefore by ease of time, you're going to have a slower rise in your blood sugar rather than a rush of simple sugars into your body. So our complex carbohydrates are vegetables like spinach, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, carrot, squash, potatoes, corn, beans, peas, lentils, certainly soy foods like edamame, our whole grains, our quinoa, our brown rice, any of those kind of multi-grain, whole grain products are going to be a complex carbohydrate. And food and whole fruits with the skins, apples, pears, oranges, berries, plums, apricots, all of these foods are going to be high in fiber and more complex. Dates, certainly, other types of root vegetables, and mushrooms. So these are our good carbohydrates. These are our good sugars that we want to have in our diet every day. We want to have in abundance because they're not only going to give us um, slower acting carbohydrates to control blood sugars. It's going to give us fiber to fuel our gut microbiome, which we've talked in the past plenty, that is so important. And more research is looking into the effects of our gut microbiome on our health, on cancer risk, on diabetes risk, even on obesity. So we want to fuel the good bacteria in our gut with these complex carbohydrates. Due to that fiber in the food takes longer to digest, as I mentioned, it's going to be a slower rise in the blood sugars and have less of an impact on insulin. So complex carbohydrates fuel the gut, which is a healthy immune system. And that's what we need to fight potential illnesses, potential bacteria or viral infections, to protect our cells when they do get damaged, to repair itself, to get rid of it, to reduce the risk of the many different little changes that can happen in a cell from becoming cancerous. So keep it complex, of course, as we've mentioned. So hopefully I've answered the question of whether sugar feeds cancer. Sugar is required for every cell of the body. Let's not forget that. Some cancer cells do have more insulin receptors. It is true that the cancer cells do need more sugar to replicate and to thrive. So that means that they have more insulin receptors. So an elevated insulin levels stimulate more cell growth. A better plan to reduce the risk of cancer and for our eating habits while we are on treatment is to support that controlled blood sugar to minimize the production of insulin and therefore kind of minimize that stimulus. So again, we're going to limit those processed simple sugars to avoid that elevation in the blood sugar levels, which can raise the insulin. So routinely high levels of insulin may in turn kind of increase the risk of different types of cancers. So of course, high sugar intake of the simple added sugars can also increase or increase the risk of weight gain. So high sugar foods are typically high in calories, and over time, of course, this may cause excess weight. That excess weight has been linked to greater risk of several types of cancer. So it is a consideration to say, what are the effects of me eating a candy bar every day or a slice of cake? Or do I only have that slice of cake once a week and it's not really a problem? So that's important to kind of self-reflect and consider, where we're at with those kind of habits. Should I avoid all carbohydrates? Hopefully we all um, agree now that no, we're not going to avoid all carbohydrates. There has been a lot of talk over the years. I get questions a lot about the ketogenic diet. It may seem reasonable that very low carbohydrate ketogenic diets could help to reduce progress of some types of cancers, but the evidence is really not there. Um, there's very preliminary and very limited evidence on, brain cancers, maybe in gastric cancers, but I don't think there's a strong enough evidence to say that the people with these types of cancer should be following a ketogenic diet. my concern with a ketogenic diet is going to restrict not only our processed simple sugars, but foods that have good carbs, and that provide those nutrients that we know can help fight cancer, like the fruits and vegetables. And in ketogenic diets are very, very difficult to sustain. Depending on how you're doing the ketogenic diet, you may restrict too much protein, you may not get enough, especially if you're on treatment, to support recovery from every cycle of chemo or from radiation or surgery. Um, you may be getting very unhealthy fats depending on how you're working that diet. And that can be additionally inflammatory. So that is a concern as well. If you're eating a lot of butter and lard and fried foods, that could be a concern as well, as far as inflammatory oils that you'd be concerned. So no, we don't necessarily want this type of a ketogenic diet. We do have that call to reduce added sugars. So for healthy eating, there's a recommendation to reduce that added sugar by 30 to 50%. And as I mentioned, those are things like cane sugar or syrups, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, um, dextrose, fructose, things like that. So basically, the rule of thumb right now is limiting added sugars, because, like I said, it's very hard to avoid completely, but limiting the added sugars to 25 grams for women and 38 grams for men. And the nice thing about our food labels now is our food labels will list added sugars under the carbohydrates and the sugar. So we do have that number that we can look at. So if we're looking at a product that has 15 grams of added sugar versus a product that has 5, we can make better choices. So the added sugar doesn't include naturally occurring sugars from fruits and milk. I believe the definition does, in the regulatory sense, include honey, but I would, again, I always encourage people to not only look at the label, but to look in the ingredients. What is in the product? And if it's fruit and honey, that I wouldn't worry about, versus the high fructose corn syrup or the corn syrup and fructose and all of these other additives, basically. So for cancer patients, we can't stop eating sugar, of course. However, we can make smarter choices. Limit the simple, and remember, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans are the very foods that appear to fight cancer the best. We've talked about that a lot in the past. So we're going to choose those complex carbohydrates. But remember, there is also a factor of what are we eating these foods with? And it does make a difference as far as that blood sugar management and that insulin production and everything that we just talked about, what foods we're having with the meal. So if we're having a complex, balanced meal with carbohydrate, protein, and healthy fat, that is also going to factor into better sugar management than just a big bowl of fruit or just a plate of pasta or something like that. So these things help to reduce that insulin production as well. So keep that in mind. We always want to have those, all of those components in a meal or snack. So we want to look for something that has the high fiber, the protein, the healthy fats in combination. So we have better nutritional value in these products. So hopefully we answered that question. And that's such a common myth. There are a lot of other things that we get asked a lot of, and some other common questions we'll go through now. So artificial sweeteners being one of them. So the comment is always artificial sweeteners cause cancer. It is a myth. There is no substantial evidence that artificial sweeteners cause cancer. I will say there is some evidence that saccharin, sucralose, and aspartame can disrupt the gut microbiome. And as much as we've talked about the gut microbiome in the past, how important that is for to reduce inflammation and for our immune system and for weight management, it is a concern. There is some studies with smaller studies, probably more with mice, so not definitely definitive gold standard type studies, that found that it could lead to glucose intolerance. So again, so not something that we necessarily want. They did not find necessarily this with stevia. So I have always kind of suggested if anybody wanted that no calorie sweetener to try out this stevia as an option. Saccharin can increase the risk of seizures, but only to those that are particularly susceptible. So that is a concern to keep in mind as well when it comes to artificial sweeteners. Um, a lot we encourage the vegan or some form of a plant-based diet throughout the spectrum of somebody's cancer journey, and we've talked plenty about how that plant-based diet can boost the immune system and reduce the risk of recurrence and support the gut microbiome. So certainly we want that plant-based diet. The extreme of that is the vegan, meaning that there's no animal products in the diet. And many people get concerned that you can't get enough protein from a diet like that. It is a myth. It is possible with proper planning to get adequate and complete protein from a vegan diet. You do want to eat a variety of foods. Your beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, rice, quinoa, potatoes, soy will all provide good protein, and when in combination, they're going to give you complete proteins. If you follow, say, a pescatarian diet where we're also going to have some fish, then you'll get even more protein. But it is possible to plan that. I think the most important thing when it comes to these diets is that variety. We also have to remember that a lot of vegetables do provide protein themselves, especially the cruciferous vegetables. So broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower are also going to give you some protein as well as some other vegetables. So when we're eating an abundance of those things, we are going to get some from those products as well. So yes, it is possible to get enough protein and to be well nourished on a vegan diet. The vegan diet is low in vitamin B12. So many people do get concerned with that. There's two options there. You can take a vitamin supplement, but there's also the nutritional yeast flakes that many people will use, like kind of like a Parmesan cheese and other cooking that you can add into products. So you can add into cheese, like a cashew cheese. You can add nutritional yeast flakes, and that's going to give a source of B12 and B vitamins as well as a little bit of protein and a little bit of fiber. So keep that in mind as well. So that's a nice option for getting enough protein and nutrients on the vegan diet or the plant-based diet. So another myth that I hear a lot of and is still circulating around there is you should avoid egg yolks. I still have a lot of people who will only eat egg whites. They avoid egg yolks. That's bad. So it has become a myth. In fact, according to the American Heart Association, eggs can be a part of a heart-healthy diet. Research shows that cholesterol from food is not contributing to heart disease, and the majority of cholesterol in our bodies is made in our liver. So we really are contributing our own cholesterol to the issues, and the issue is more so the inflammation that occurs in our vessels that cause the damage that leads to the fat molecules in our blood getting sticky and staying and causing this plaque. So it's kind of oversimplified to think and unproven that eating the cholesterol from those food, eating eggs is going to somehow contribute to this. So one large egg is only 70 calories. There are 6 grams of protein in an egg. And then you get nutrients like choline, which is important for brain health. You get lutein and zeaxanthin, which are carotenoids in the egg yolks, which can protect our eyes from all this blue light from the computers that we are constantly exposed to. And then, of course, eggs are going to be a source of vitamin D, which is very important. And a lot of people certainly don't get enough vitamin D. So I would highly encourage you to eat the whole egg. You can look into free range eggs or or Eggland's Best, or organic eggs, as far as eggs that are in hens that are treated better, and may actually have better nutrient profiles, higher amounts of omega-3 fats from the type of food and feed that they get. So I would encourage you to look into that, as far as your egg choices. Another myth, or comments that we hear a lot, is fresh fruits and vegetables are the best form, meaning frozen or canned will not have as many nutrients as a fresh fruit or vegetable. And it is actually a little bit of, it is a myth. Frozen and canned fruits and vegetables can be just as healthy as fresh, and maybe, and even in some cases, better. Produce that are frozen and even canned are picked at peak ripeness, maximizing the nutrient levels in that product. Um, some nutrients may even be better absorbed when cooked, say, for instance, from canned foods. I would say, for as far as frozen, picking that produce at peak freshness and flash freezing kind of suspends time for that produce and maintains all the nutritional value. So that is my first choice. Canned products. Let's Perfect example is tomato products, tomato sauce, stewed tomatoes, things like that. The cooking process actually improves our ability to absorb lycopene, which is a carotenoid from tomatoes. Um, Especially important for men, but also for women, as an antioxidant and reducing the risk of cancers like prostate cancer. So that would be one nutrient that is better absorbed. Quick cooking of broccoli can even better help to absorb the nutrients better than raw. So the loss, there you are going to get some nutrient loss, of course, from the heating process that happens with canned foods, which is why frozen is always my first choice. So if you're talking about things like green beans or leafy greens or spinach, those might be more susceptible to that cooking process. So I would try fresh or frozen. But tomato sauce and beans and lentils and things like that are less affected, and certainly worthwhile to buy in that form if it's financially or better as far as loss, and not losing that product. So um, the loss is not likely significantly different from the canning process than you're going to get from having a fresh fruit or vegetable picked early, not at ripe, and transported for a week or more and then, because once it's picked, say like an orange or an apple or something, you're going to gradually lose nutrients in that process. So the faster that you can suspend that time with the frozen process, or get that to the table, the better. So we also kind of encourage local farms and using the farmers markets and our local produce as well for the fresh. Um, all the time, always a question that we receive is breast cancer survivors should avoid soy foods, and that is a myth. There has been multiple large-scale studies that have found that consuming moderate amounts of soy does not increase the risk of a breast cancer survivor's risk of recurrence or death. High consumption of foods containing soy 12 months or more after diagnosis may actually reduce all-cause mortality, or reduce the risk of you dying in breast cancer survivors. And the largest study to date with 10,000 breast cancer patients found that consuming 10 milligrams of isoflavones, which is probably one serving a day or so, maybe 1 to 2, was linked to a 25% decrease in the breast cancer recurrence. So we really are kind of finding almost the opposite, that we want to have some foods. Now, soy foods is another product that can become highly processed. your old standard kind of Boca burger, artificial burgers that are made with soy protein concentrate and isolate are much more processed soy. When we're talking about soy foods and soy intake in these kind of studies and this kind of situation, we're looking at edamame, we're looking at drinking soy milk, and you're looking at people who are eating tofu or silken tofu in smoothies, things like that, whole soy foods, just as we talked about whole foods and whole grains, and minimally processed. So kids definitely keep that in mind as part of your good choices. So I do want to kind of move on to our best nutrition plan for healthy life, um, just to kind of bring it all together into that healthy diet plan. We want to stick with those naturally occurring sugars that we find in fruit versus the processed sugars. Avoid concentrated sugars such as in sodas and sugary drinks. 100% fruit juice is okay. We still want a smaller quantity, 6 ounce serving, for instance. Once, maybe once a day. But because when we juice, we're of course leaving out the best fiber parts and the skins and the whole product. So we want to have that whole food experience. Limit treats, such as desserts, to a couple times a week in those modest portions. And this doesn't mean which means we don't have to avoid completely a nice slice of cake or a piece of pie or something like that. You just don't want that to be daily, multiple times in the day types of occurrences. When eating treats, consider the options, of course. There could be options that are combined with healthy fats like nuts and fiber and high protein ingredients. So if we do need that kind of sweet treat every night, think about doing things like baked apples with nuts and cinnamon and a little honey, or date walnut balls. You have maybe a little bit of chocolate or something like that into it. So there are a lot of options out there and recipes for making healthy dessert type items, healthy items with chocolate, things like that. And dark chocolate is actually very healthy for us, so we do want to have that around in our diets. I usually just pick up a dark chocolate bar and kind of break off a couple of squares every day, so I have a little bit in my diet. So let's consider that we focusing on that whole food, unprocessed foods, um, fruits, vegetables, whole grains. Interesting is the combination of foods. So, for instance, spinach and citrus contain fiber, magnesium, um, polyphenols that help to battle insulin resistance. So, even though they may be a fruit and may have bad sugar, they may actually help to manage blood sugar and resist that rise in diabetes risk or risk. When we need a small amount of sweetener, as we mentioned, choose natural sweetener. So we talked about honey and maple syrup as good options for sweeteners for recipes. Coconut sugar, date sugar, uh, molasses, stevia, as I mentioned, xylitol. So turbinado sugar would be more of a very raw sugar if you particularly needed it. But I think a lot of those natural sweetener can be a good option for replacement of the processed table sugar that we normally put in recipes, especially as we get into the holidays now. Of course, replace saturated fats with healthy fats, including the monounsaturated fats, which can improve insulin sensitivity and glucose control. So that's going to work against some of those concerns that can lead to cancer and being overweight. Those are our nuts and our olives and our avocado, sunflower oil, canola oil. Eating foods high in omega-3 fats like salmon, tuna, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, herring, will also help to control blood sugars and reduce inflammation in the body and support that healthy diet. And herbs and spices like cinnamon, turmeric, ginger, garlic, parsley, rosemary. So there are many different functions here. Cinnamon and ginger, some of these are going to add a lot of flavor, even lemon juice sometimes. They can kind of trick our senses into thinking something is more sweet. I've definitely found that with cinnamon. You're going to protect against potential damage to the DNA. Parsley, basil, oregano, thyme, all of those can do that. You can um, reduce the effect of smoke or damage to that can lead to damage to the DNA. So we want to include all these kind of things in our diet. And our goal is ultimately not to eliminate any entire food groups, but to make the better choices in all of those food groups. Um, Thank you very much again for coming. And if you have questions between the chat or the Q&A, um, whenever you're ready, I can answer your questions.
Thank you, Marie. There's one request in the chat box. Can you see that?
Yes, absolutely. So I will email the PowerPoint to Jan and Lee, and they send that out right with evaluation email, I believe.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
All the this presentation as well as all of ours are recorded, and so we encourage you to share them because this information, Marie, was so valuable, and really, I think we've all heard those myths. So they're very common misconceptions that people have. So thank you for giving us the information so we can also share that with people that we speak to. I'll stop before I tell you about our next lectures coming up. I'll just add really quick that, yes, as Marie said, Lee will send out the evaluation and she'll send out the PowerPoint that Marie is always so generous to share with all of us. And if you would complete the survey, the evaluation, we really appreciate it. Marie, there are a couple of questions in the chat
Yeah.
box.
Yes, thank you. So, as I mentioned, I think coconut sugar was on that list of good substitutes for the processed table sugar. It can have less of an effect and less of a spike on blood sugars than regular blood sugar. So I think that's an option for sure. Um, when you need sugar, or maybe you need a dry sugar into a baked good versus honey or maple syrup, which of course have their own distinct flavors too. So sometimes they're not ideal for whatever recipe you're working on. And I think I wrote down that email in case we don't have that one, Jen, or
Okay,
for the
thank you for writing that down.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do have one other lecture this month, which will be on Friday, November 22nd. And this is Lung Cancer Awareness Month. So our topic will be, of course, on lung cancer. And the presenters will be Dr. Nathaniel McElhaney, Dr. Samuel Richter, Dr. Matten Matthew, and our exercise physiologist, Lisa Rigari from the Drummond Therapy Centers. And I just have to say, Marie, I'm like really in the mood for a baked apple now. And I hear it's going to be cold tomorrow. So,
Can I say I've been making baked apples a lot lately? I've just been slicing them a little bit of in the pan with a little bit of honey and cinnamon, and topping them on top of like oatmeal or high protein pancake or whatever. So yes, same thing. I've been craving them for quite a bit now.
oh, it's the perfect
And
fall dessert.
and it's great for your gut because when you bake apples, you develop the pectin in the apple, and it's good for our GI tract and our gut microbiome. So, yes,
Okay.
good.
Okay.
Make your
Everybody,
baked
let's have baked
apples.
apples tonight. Thank you, Marie. And
Exactly.
as always, we appreciate all the research that you put into this in your presentation. Thank you, everyone, for taking time today to join us. And hopefully, we'll see you on Friday. Okay. Have a good
Thank
afternoon.
you.
Bye.
Goodbye.